Hello everyone, my name is Kalle. I'm a self-publishing indie game developer from Berlin in Germany, and so far I've released 5 games on 8 different platforms, with none of them becoming a hit that generated life-changing money or anything, but they all ended up grossing between $25,000 to $100,000. There never was a back-breaking flop among them, but today I want to talk to you about a really disastrous early access launch on Steam. So if you're also a game developer, you could learn a bit from my stupidity, or if you're a gamer, you could learn a thing or two about why game developers sometimes seem to make really bad decisions, and follow me through all the game's Steam statistic for the first 4 years, ending with a PlayStation VR2 port that finally made the biggest chunk of money for the game after having that super disastrous launch week that only grossed $500. So to get started with all of that, let's have a look at my desktop. So first of all, a little bit about the game in question. It's called Snow Scout, a virtual reality walking simulator on skis, where you essentially roleplay as yourself, having taken a job in a remote alpine resort that has to be reopened for the coming season, and you're up alone all by yourself there, only being guided by radio by a friendly lady who works for the organization you signed up for, keeping track of your progress and explaining your tasks. So you ski around the resort, open ski routes, repairing stuff, firing the avalanche cannon and stuff like this. So for me, this was essentially a dream game because it includes all the aspects that I personally love about virtual reality gaming. But a lot of more experienced developers than me always say never make your dream game, because that often is a task way too big, especially when you're working solo or in a small team. But I was so in love with this idea that I totally went all in and scrounged up a bit of money to make this happen with a professional team. And I even managed to get some German games funding, which essentially paid for half of the production costs, because without that it would have looked really bleak after this first month of sales. And I guess this is where we jump right into the statistics. So here you can see that the game launched on March 17th in 2022, after we had worked on the game for about 11 months. And this was essentially the early access launch. And as you can see, the game started off with only 14 copies sold on the first day, and then it totally crashed and we had this pretty embarrassing trail off here. So essentially after 2 weeks nothing was happening at all anymore. And so in the whole launch month, we only made $507 of Steam gross. So if you exclude taxes and refunds off of that, and Steam taking their 30% cut, that is pretty much nothing. And one thing that played a big part in this, in my opinion, is that we started the game as an early access title, because we had done the same thing with our virtual reality game Rainbow Reactor in 2019. And back then it worked really great, because we knew we couldn't really fully test the game, especially with so many different VR devices around. I mean, first of all, everybody has a different computer with a different performance, but even more importantly, there are different headsets and controllers that you can also mix up in VR. And of course, it was impossible for us as a team to buy every single one of these devices, test them out and make sure they work properly. So with Rainbow Reactor, we just asked people to let us know if anything was unsupported in the early access phase and to give us feedback and ideas, which is of course also super valuable. And we were able to implement a lot of stuff really quickly within a matter of days, and people were really happy to participate, and there was a really good feeling of kind of developing a game together with the players, which was super great. So with Snow Scout we thought we'd just do the same thing all over again, but it turned out a lot had changed in these 3 years apparently. I mean, you always have to give a really long explanation when you start an early access title, what you're going to do, how long it will take, if there will be any changes to the price structure and everything. And so we told people up front that the game still needed lots of testing, and that we'd even reward tester feedback by giving out game keys for our own games and even some other games that I had bought, so that I could give the keys as a reward. But for some reason, people really didn't want any of this at all, and instead trashed the game with bad reviews pretty much right from the start. And if you've ever looked into Steam releasing, you'll know that you need 10 reviews really quickly, or Steam will just bury the game. But the worst thing that can happen is that you get 10 reviews and they are in positive but mixed. And this happens if the percentage of positive reviews goes below 70%, because then right on the top of the game's homepage it will say review score mixed, and then the game is practically dead because Steam will just bury it. And I mean, you can still look up the reviews to this day. Many people complaining that the controls just don't work, without going into specific details which controllers or headset combinations they used. One person just only wrote very frustrating 2 out of 10, which is actually not helping at all. So instead of reacting to feedback within a couple of days like we did with Rainbow Reactor, there was very little we could do reacting on some of this feedback. And in some cases, when there were issues we could identify, we changed them and updated them and then asked the people to change their review, but nobody did that either. So we were kind of stuck with this catastrophic launch. And even though we kept improving the game over the course of the first year, and even beyond that when we went on to make a PlayStation VR2 version of it, the game never really bounced back, as you can see in the statistics of the following years. So after exactly 1 year, the game had sold 180 units on Steam, for a total revenue of $2,319. And this also includes the game leaving early access, which happened exactly 5 months after the early access launch, so exactly as we had planned and openly communicated it in the early access description. And if we zoom in into this actual launch week, so when the game was released as version 1.0, you can see it only sold 30 units, even though again it had a nice discount at the time, and grossed a total of $330 that week. And this is significantly less than the actual early access launch, which is kind of strange compared with our game Rainbow Reactor, because there the actual launch surpassed the early access launch by about twice the interest, if I remember that correctly. But here we just couldn't work our way out of that mixed ratings hole, because as I said, even though we fixed stuff, people didn't rescind the negative rating. And of course that's hugely deterring if you're interested in a game and you see this yellow mixed line right on the Steam store page. Of course, as it always goes, if you look at the first 4 years of the game, or actually it's about 4.5 years if you include the early access phase, you always have these little sales. And at some point in the middle here, the game finally got back to a positive overall rating. So we ended up selling a total of 536 games, which amounted to a total gross of $6,418. And you can also see that our wish lists, always an interesting metric that I'm also going to show you in a little bit more detail. Because in 2022 I still hadn't wisened up to the fact how important wishlists really are. I mean, they are maybe not that important for a VR game because it's super difficult to get into the new and trending list with the small installed user base that actually use VR. But also I guess in the heat of developing we really didn't have so much time to invest into any social media activity to boost our wishlist numbers. But let's just have a little look at the data to see how it all turned out. And as you can see, we were at least smart enough to start the Steam store page about 5 months before the game actually launched. So that was near the end of October 2021. And even though we didn't have any specific social media beats or anything, the wishlist ads grew quite steadily, almost in a linear fashion. Then in February 25th, we probably did something, I don't even know what, probably sent out a press release via gamespress.com or something like that. And on the game's launch day, March 15th, 2022, we were at 364 wishlists. And then the next day when the game actually came out in early access, there was quite a big boost. Also some purchases and activations, but an even way higher number of total deletes. So that's not so good, of course. And if we look at the time frame from the start of the year 2022, which again includes the early access launch here, we have another little boost here, which was the Steam Summer Sale. Even though I guess not too many people are interested in a skiing game in the heat of summer, and especially with VR, it's often a bit too warm under the headset. But still, as you can see here, when we had the full 1.0 launch, the wishlists were about 720, then had another little boost in the first week of 1.0 selling, and then they continued to grow linearly again. And so this is even true for the lifelong statistics of the game, kind of linear growth, also extremely linear development of total deletes, also pretty steady increase of actual purchases. So the outstanding wishes go a bit down and up and down again, and today they stand at 1,779 with a total number of 3,028. But only 295 of these were converted in the whole lifetime of the game, which leads to a conversion rate of only 9.9%. You can see it says here, wishlist conversion rate is below the Steam average. And I guess the reason for that is that we never put the game on an extremely high discount. The highest we ever did was around 70%, so then the game still costs $10. And I have to say I'm really not prepared to go any lower, because really that trashing in the early access phase has kind of shocked me a little bit. I guess I had the feeling that some people were really mean towards the game, which was a big contrast to when we launched Rainbow Reactor, especially because I was super happy with what we achieved with the game. It turned out pretty much exactly as I had hoped for. Only turns out just because it's my dream game, it doesn't mean that anybody else wants to play it apparently. But still I had the feeling that much of the criticism was really overblown. And fortunately for me, this really proved to be true when we released the PlayStation VR2 version, which was received way better. The pretty popular PSVR2 YouTuber Jammy Hero even called it his indie game of the year 2024. And as of today, the game is rated 4.36 out of 5 stars on the PlayStation Store and grossed about $25,000 there. So in my opinion, this proves it's not a bad game, and this can really serve as a cautionary tale when it comes to early access. I mean, I guess now on Steam, demos are the new early access, because what really broke our backs here is that the bad reviews from the early access phase carried over into the main release of the game, of course, whereas when you have a demo, you can have a separate demo page with its own reviews, so you can collect feedback there, and people can let you know if stuff isn't working, or they don't like it, or they want more features. But then when you close the demo and release the full game, this all goes away and you start with a fresh slate, which is much fairer in my opinion. But be that as it may, the PlayStation VR2 version brought us a great deal to breaking even with the game, because as I said, with this being my kind of dream game, I really wanted to make it professionally, and it incurred a lot of costs that we can see in this graphic. So the game designer worked for 9 months, that was me of course, with costs of 39,000 euros. Then we had a developer for 9 months who worked freelance for $27,000, and a 3D graphics artist who worked for 6 months but cost 30,000 euros. And even though it looks different, all these salaries are pretty much the same. The only problem is that when you have an actual employee like the graphics artist, you have to pay a huge ton of social security costs here in Germany. And also for myself, the cost was quite a bit higher than the freelance costs. Because I'm the CEO of my own company, I don't pay as much social security as for an employee. So there's quite a bit of different stuff going into all these numbers. Then we had 2D graphics, another 5,000 euros. Then a lot of expenses that I'd call asset costs, because they include voiceover, which plays a huge part in the game, sound design, music, and graphical assets from the Unity Asset Store, as well as some little quality of life assets for Unity, like making colored folders in the hierarchy and project window. Very little stuff, but it adds up, and we ended up with a cost of 9,000 euros here. Then we had office and external costs that were 4,000 euros. This, for example, included that the funding required us to get an official age rating from the German USK, which costs 1,500 euros alone. Total cost of the game came to 114,000 euros. So again, I was really fortunate that I didn't have to cover all these costs out of my own pocket, but half of this came from the German government. But still, even the money the PlayStation VR2 version brought in wasn't enough to break even. But I'm always looking for ways how I can make more money out of my existing games, either by bringing them to more platforms, or in this case just reusing parts, because we made a kind of spin-off of the game called 90s Extreme Skiing, where we turned the skiing mechanics into a kind of retro-style downhill skiing extravaganza in the style of games like 1080, SSX or Cool Borders. And so this game again made a similar amount to Snow Scout, but with a way lower development time thanks to all the existing assets. And so this finally pushed the game into the zone of being profitable. But of course you have to admit that it again cost a lot of additional work, first making the PlayStation VR2 port of Snow Scout and then turning 90s Extreme Skiing into a full-fledged game. So if I divide my salary I got as a game designer for Snow Scout through all these months of work, I probably end up around the European minimum wage, but I still think this is quite a nice achievement for something that I came up with myself and worked on being my own boss essentially. So even though I was really shattered when these first early access results came in from Snow Scout, I'm really happy how it all turned out in the end. So if you ever have a botched launch on Steam, don't give up right away. It's still possible to turn things around in my experience, and even if not, you've gained a great deal of experience. So if you liked this video and eventually want to follow our journey developing our next title, please don't forget to like and subscribe. If you have your own experiences to share, just leave them down in the comments. And if you press the bell button to turn on notifications, I'll definitely see you in the next video. Bye!